Imagine being so influential as a character and as a pair that your life single-handedly influences the lives and careers of others. Okay, that sounds like a lot of responsibility, but it happens surprisingly often, and surprisingly often in K-pop especially. Probably the most well-known recent example is Jarina, and Urina specifically from Girls' Planet. Urina's exclusion from Kepler upset fans greatly and led to them being more conscientious about voting for several other trainees on several other shows. Xiaorina's experiences directly influenced the careers, or lack thereof, of Junghao, Ricky, Matthew, and Keita on Boys Planet, and Fuko, Sabi, and Coco on Island 2, among others. In fact, Urina's elimination had an even wider reaching impact, as it sent the message that if you want someone in the group, you need to vote for them and no one else, no matter what. So, Yurin is one example, so is Xiaoting and Bora and Chaibing and more, which is all well and good, but Urina's place as the most accidentally influential survival show figure may well accidentally be taken over soon, or maybe even has already been taken over, not by one person but by two, or two people who became so influential they merged into one, Steven Universe style. You read the title, you probably saw part 1. You know we're talking about the insane power and implications of Haobin. As usual, I ended up having to split this minisode into 2 parts. In the previous part, I went over some corrections and amendments for my previous episode on Zero Base 1, and then discussed the history of Haobin. I then discussed the similarities between the two members of the group and their differences, considering what each brought to the table and the interesting difference in how they're treated by fans, with Hanbin being assigned an arguably accurate personality in fandom and fanfiction, and Junghao being given a considerably more distorted personality, likely to become some wacko Mary Sue self-insert kind of character. In this part of the minisode, I'll discuss the more rabid side of Haobin's fandom, the complaints that the fans have, and the drama, pretty much. I'll then discuss the power of Haobin in the industry, primarily looking at fanfiction, which is an easily accessible measure of popularity, but also considering things like member-priced photo cards. Finally, I'll consider the implications of Haobin and their incredible popularity on the industry, produce, and the two members of the ship themselves. For this minisode, as with the last one, I'll give a general trigger/content warning for Boys Planet and everything involved, including the manipulation of trainees and human rights violating abuses, rabid K-pop fan drama, real person shipping and fanfiction, and the fetishization of gay men. The first 2 are pretty vaguely mentioned, and the last 2 are discussed in somewhat more detail. You've been warned. So with that said, let's move on to discussing Haobin's fans. Haobin are so popular that their fans have their own unique fandom name, Haobinists. A popularity distinction which I don't really think exists for any other ship, or at least they aren't as commonly used as the Haobinist descriptor. This section is somewhat critical of Haobinists and leans towards the negative side, so be aware of that in advance. Also, to counteract that, let's start with some positive stuff. Haobinists are super dedicated, and I think many of them have been encouraged to be better people by Haobin. We'll discuss the power of Haobin more in the next section, but Haobinists have been churning out Haobin edits, content, fanfiction, and more since Boys Planet, and have never stopped, even for a moment. There is a reason Haobin are so well known. It's because of their fans, who make every moment go viral, who promote the pair like no one's business, and who convert more and more non-fans every day. Not to mention they do tons of work to support the group, both financially and non-financially. Zero Base 1 would be nowhere near as big as they are now if Haobinists didn't exist. I also have no doubt that they have done regular good K-pop fan things like donating to charities on important days and creating support groups for each other. Also, Haobin have become somewhat of a safe space for a lot of queer fans, and regardless of whether they're dating or not, there is no understating the importance of that. Alright, on to some less positive things. First, despite the fact that their biases are quite literally the front and centre of Zero Base One, and everything related to the group, both Junghao and Hanbin stans, and I mean stans, not fans, seem obsessed with the idea that Haobin, both individually and as a pair, are being mistreated. Everything from a lack of variety show appearances to a lack of lines to a lack of centre time, and more is held up as proof that they're being mistreated. There was even this post which discussed how a lot of people were very upset that Junghao would only have a few lines in Dr. Doctor, and were concerned about his lack of lines in general. I think this is the epitome of an example of how much Haobin fans blow the supposed mistreatment of Haobin out of proportion, and I'll make the same comment in this video that I made on this post. If anyone genuinely thinks that Junghao, out of all people in Zero Base One, is being mistreated, well, I don't know what to say to them. You know, I thought this was a pretty tame comment. He's literally the centre of the group, is a main vocalist and visual, gets tons of promotion opportunities, solo songs and solo stages, and more. He's treated as the pseudo-main character of the group, which makes sense, since he's also probably the most popular. Although it's not a full representation of the fandom, the Zero Base One subreddit census in 2024 found that almost a third of the members biased Junghao. Almost a third! That's insane. Ricky was second with only 12.9%, and Hanbin was at 5th with 8.4%. Never fear though, Haobin was still going strong. Hanbin was the top bias wrecker with 33.2% of members nominating him. Hence, Haobin. Anyway, despite what I thought was a tame comment, people still found issue with my words, talking about how he didn't go on any variety shows, how he didn't get anything solo outside of Always, which was apparently, quote, his right to perform, and thus seemingly didn't count, and assuming that Junghao was in fact devastated by his lack of lines, to which I pointed out that he didn't seem super upset or insecure about it. If something as small as a lack of lines in one song makes him insecure about his Korean skills and skills in general, then what can I say? Junghao's a far weaker person than I thought he was. Other people also said that he doesn't get, quote, tons of lines being the language that I used, to which I pointed out that Junghao has the most lines in the whole group and almost double the number of lines that Gyuvin has. This is normal for a main vocalist. Zero Base One are very strong vocally and have two main vocalists, Tae and Junghao, and two pseudo-main vocalists, Hanbin and Gunnook, and Junghao still stands easily at the top in terms of lines. He doesn't get high notes, sure, but he's a dancer, centre and visual, so it makes sense that Wakeone would give their favourite, Hanbin, and the other main vocalist, Tae, most high notes as compensation for not being, well, Junghao. If any main vocalist here is being mistreated, it's Tae, who's been pushed to the side in place of Haobin. This line distribution I'm showing on screen includes Always, and is after the release of the Blue album, which evened out the line distribution a bit, and which was released shortly before the recording of this minisode, but Always only adds about 100 seconds or a bit more worth of lines, which still places Hao firmly in first place and still approaching 2 times the number of lines that Gyuvin has, so I think my point still stands. Reading the comments of this post was interesting because there's a clear divide between the people who think that Junghao and Hanbin are doing fine, and the people who think that Junghao is being mistreated and has no confidence left. Let me be clear, Junghao is being held back from his full potential, but so is literally every other member of this group. The group is too big for all of the huge personalities in it, and is just a stepping stone in their careers. To fully showcase each member, they'd need to be the centres each of 9 4 to 7 member groups, and that just isn't happening. So if you want full potential, I guess you'll have to look forward to disbandment. In other Haobinist news, the Haobin ban. This is a conspiracy theory that seems to exist, which states that Wake One have banned Haobin content to some extent, that they weren't appearing together as much outside of obvious money-making schemes. Why? Well, the fans and poster had theories, including that the company would be worried that their queer associations would bring controversy to the group. That said though, I may be looking in the wrong places, but I don't see the Haobin ban. There's tons of content of them together, and they're always together in everything, which makes sense since they're, money-making machines. I always see tons of them, and tons of their fans freaking out about them. It seems like this was more of a thing around debut, but even then I don't remember seeing it. Maybe I'm misinterpreting the theory? I was interested if there was any other drama and looked on Twitter, known to be a toxic K-pop place. Here's some things I found. First, when I started looking, fans were freaking out about how Junghao had said that they should ship Haobin more. Hilarious. I also saw some people talking about a previous drama where Junghao hung out with Yoojin in Japan, and apparently a lot of Haobinists were upset that Yoojin wasn't Hanbin. Hence, Haobin had to hang out more. I also found a lot of hilarious Haobin content, including a lot of clips and images of them looking at each other fondly, but that's nothing new here. Next, I found a massive Haobin iceberg chart, which has full explanations in the comments and covers some seriously obscure things, as icebergs do. Next, this one person who may or may not be a troll, who is anti-Haobin and pro-Gyuvin and Hanbin, and who seemingly believes that Haobin are not a thing and that Hanbin-Gyuvin is the true ship. Next, people complaining about Hanbin's mistreatment. The first one complains about protest trucks that were apparently sent to Wake One around debut, presumably complaining about Hanbin being treated unfairly better than the other members, and the other one, weirdly enough, says that Hanbin is wasting his time in the group and is being harassed by OT8s while working his ass off. Now, I've personally never seen the company disrespect him or the fans blame him for anything, and I don't think I've ever seen an anti-Hanbin OT8, but I'm also not in a lot of toxic fandom spaces, and I'm sure those people exist. That said though, I don't think Hanbin is wasting his time in the group. He's one of the members who has been the best supported and best able to showcase himself while in the group, and has a bright career both currently and ahead of him. So I don't know about that one, guys. Mind you, this account is marked as a parody account, so goodness knows if this was serious or not. Looking at the rest of their account, they certainly seem serious. In a similar vein, I found this post complaining about Junghao's exclusion from some group activities, and considering the lack of evidence or context here, I can only assume that there is indeed context that makes this understandable, especially considering how well Wake One treat Junghao in general. Finally, the big thing, the fetishization. It's a well-known assumption, stereotype, fact maybe, that a lot of people who consume BL media or other media that has gay men in it, whether it be books, manhwa, shows, and more, are straight women. Now here's where it gets complicated, because although straight women are in fact the majority consumers of this media and of romance in general, there is still a pretty large chunk of the audience that is gay or otherwise LGBT+, for whom BL and other LGBT+ media isn't just romance but is representation and community. Even beyond this, there are a large number of straight women who self-report as enjoying the genre because of reasons outside of fetishization. For instance, to explore their own concept of gender or to consume relationships which don't have the inherent power imbalance of a heterosexual relationship in a patriarchal world. There are many videos about these kinds of women online, and I may well make a video exploring the various types of consumers of BL in the future, but the fact of the matter is that a very vocal portion, probably an extreme minority, of BL consumers, watchers, etc. are straight women who fetishize gay men. And Haobin are no exception. A lot of their fans fetishize them to an extreme degree, as is the case with many gay ships in K-pop and other media. This is primarily seen through NSFW fanfictions, although it is also often seen when fans project themselves onto their idols and their idols' supposed relationships, and when fans break boundaries with idols. You know that clip I mentioned earlier where Junghao encouraged a fan to ship him more and everyone thought it was amazing? Well, at the end of the day, that fan should not have been talking about shipping Haobin to Junghao himself. Like, holy moly! Junghao handled that brilliantly and kept this ship, which probably makes him a lot of money, alive. But how do you think he feels about it? I mean, I don't know, but I can tell you it's boundary breaking. I personally would feel incredibly violated. We obviously don't know Haobin's inner thoughts on this subject, but we've seen other celebrities talk about how much shipping culture affected them and their relationships with co-workers and others, most notably the members of One Direction. There is for sure a chance that Junghao and Hanbin genuinely like and or appreciate and or tolerate the fans' shipping, but if they don't, there are two possibilities. First, that they're friends and find it uncomfortable to be shipped as romantic and sexual partners, or two, they are indeed dating and find it uncomfortable for assumptions to be made about their relationship and for fans to speculate about what they're doing in their private lives. Not to mention the need in that situation to lead the fans on to some extent to continue to gain money, but the need to also not make it look too real, lest they be outed and their careers are destroyed. It's a lose-lose situation, and it would be even worse if there was a one-sided unrequited love going on here. I don't even want to think about it. I'll move on now, but at the end of the day, real person shipping is morally and ethically grey, but relatively harmless. Shoving that shipping into the faces of people involved, hanging on to a false, often sexualized and fetishized version of their personality, expecting them to bend to your whims, and not being able to see a difference between reality and fiction is far from harmless and far from okay in comparison. This kind of shipping culture is 100% a contributor to fans violating boundaries and dehumanizing their idols, especially the most shipped idols like BTS, and these are the kinds of things which lead to the poor mental health idols and other celebrities often talk about, and are a contributor to the kind of fan culture which has likely been a factor in the suicides of several idols. Okay, on that wonderful note, let's talk more about the fandom in an arguably more positive light. Let's talk about the power of the Haobin fandom and the implications of the Haobin ship, both on the industry and on Hanbin and Junghao's careers post Zero Base One. We talked about the history of Haobin, so here let's talk about some quick stats and facts which show the power of this ship. Keep in mind that although there are positives and negatives of real person shipping and fanfiction, which I will discuss in a later video, my overall stance is firmly against it. I think the boundary between fan and celebrity becomes way too blurred through real person fanfiction, and I think that they, by their nature, are violating. So just keep in mind that while I find the growth of Haobin fanfiction hilarious and fascinating, I don't even think it should have existed to begin with. So let's start from the start, pre-debut. The first post I found for this segment was this one, which predicted photo card prices for an upcoming group. Note the use of Bepler as the group name. Oh, I miss Bepler so much. This person correctly predicted that Hanbin and Junghao would be on a different level from the others, and that their photo cards would be far more expensive than other potential members. This was true. I just found it funny that they were so predictable, even pre-debut. Mind you, it was evident even during the show that Haobin was the way. Next, we have a post which shared the hilarity of the fact that it took Haobin less than 24 hours after making it into the group to have a Career Boo article about their gayness. In this case, the potential kiss in the finale. For the record, looking at the hundreds of angles of this moment online, I do indeed believe that Junghao kissed Hanbin. However, in what context, i.e. as a friend versus a lover, I have no thoughts. The next post celebrates the fact that Haobin had at that point, the 1st of July 2023, 9 days before debut, 789 fanfictions on AO3, a number I hope I don't need to tell you is astounding. Just for some more fun facts, at the time of writing this script there were 3,522 Haobin fanfictions on AO3, which was more than twice the number of the next member pairing, which was Ricky and Gyven. The most recent fanfiction was posted today. There were 177 pages worth of fanfictions, and the oldest fanfiction seems to be, oddly enough, a fanfiction from 2021, which is actually a Stray Kids Lee No and Han fanfiction, which was seemingly updated later to include Haobin, I guess. If we exclude that outlier, the oldest Haobin fanfiction on AO3 is called I Don't Know You by Jensung, and is from the 22nd of February 2023, so around the time of the second episode of the show. The description reads, "Everybody knew Sung Hanbin, but there was only one person he really wanted to know." And no, I didn't read it, although I did think the tag "Junghao is a hopeless romantic" was very accurate to his fandom personality. The comments of this celebration post point out how Chinese fans wrote an insane number of fics and were apparently posting every hour, which I guess just shows how popular Haobin were and are. Next, a post which has since been deleted, but I just wanted to point out this brilliant comment, saying it's over for Taekook when Zero Base 1 debut. And yep, that was indeed true. I haven't heard a peep out of Taekook in years, but Haobin? They're going strong. And you know it's an insanely popular ship when people start comparing it to Taekook. You know, the most popular AO3 K-pop ship of all time by a massive margin. Next, some evidence for my claims. This post, which says that pre-debut Haobin had the most expensive photo cards in the group, around 80,000 won each, roughly 80 Australian dollars. Someone even joked that it must be 800,000 won instead, and that would not surprise me with their popularity. Next, we have an interesting post from the pre-debut era which asks whether fans think that Mnet will try and replicate the Haobin star-crossed lovers storyline, since, well, it clearly wasn't expected to be as popular as it was. And this person should really be patting themselves on the back, because Mnet later announced the second season of Boys Planet with a twin theme, one boy from C group and one boy from K group who become connected. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Yes, Mnet will indeed try to milk Haobin and their fans for as much money as possible, but I'll discuss that more in the next section. The next post theorizes either an increase in content or a decrease after debut to stem the gay rumors, but a lot of people have interestingly mixed opinions on this. A lot of people just hope that Haobin don't end up with extreme shippers. It was a bit too late for that. Next are two of my favourite posts of all time. This user, Polybears67, compiled some fanfiction statistics for Zero Base 1 and Boys Planet on AO3 a little before debut in May 2023. And these posts are hilarious and brilliant, and I really recommend you check them out. Let me show you the cumulative relationships over time. Pretty normal, right? It looks like Matthew and Hanbin, the red line at the top, are pretty popular, which was to be expected with their Xiaorina thing going on, and Jiwoong and Matthew, the yellow line at the top, have been growing, which makes sense, since Jiwoong was kind of the rebound for Matthew after Haobin became a thing. But this graph seems to be missing something, right? Doesn't this graph seem a bit, I don't know, compact? What if I told you that it looks compact because this isn't the whole graph? This is barely even a fifth of the graph. Because the whole graph, well, it looks like this. And yes, that blue line is Haobin. I laughed for ages when I saw this graph. It's just so extreme. It should be on the list of craziest K-pop graphs you'd never believe are true. Haobin had over 3 times the number of fanfictions as the next most popular ship, Hanbin and Matthew, and 6 or more times the number of fics as most ships who are even distinguishable on this graph have. Here's the character graph. It's a bit more even since characters can and will appear in fics when they're not in a relationship, but Haobin are still the clear victors. Interestingly enough, as Polybears67 points out, The popularity of each character at the time of the finale almost perfectly predicted the final lineup, the only difference being Ollie in the group instead of Gunnook. So I guess watch fic popularity to get an idea of who gets put into a group? Polybears also pointed out how the AO3 fics predicted Junghao to be in first place weeks in advance of the finale, taking over from Hanbin around the time of Tomboy. Polybears links an entire AO3 trends document, and the comments talk about fun references they included in their post, and the fascinating nature of AO3 predicting the final lineup. Honestly, this prediction does make sense though, since the most popular trainees will appear the most and will also have the most votes for them, but it's funny nonetheless. One comment also discusses how Junghao is, as I mentioned in the first part of this minisode, the perfect character for people to write with, and who can fit into almost any romance trope and do well. Polybears67 made a follow-up post in August 2023, which oddly enough mentions another post which was a sequel to a previously released post, which was inspired by another post. That post being the deleted one which has the comment about how Taekook will be over when Zero Base 1 debut. The rabbit hole of Haobin fanfiction statistics posts on Reddit is insane, and fascinating. They're one of the most popular ships to come out of K-pop, arguably ever, and it shows, not only socially but also mathematically. Polybear's follow-up post shows that Haobin are still firmly at the top, and the Zero Base 1 members are all far above the other Boys Planet contestants by now, with Gunnook as always at the bottom. A romantic king maybe? Until the Matthew Gunnook thing became popular anyway. Haobin continued to be the top ship, with the gap massively growing between them and the other ships, being about 4 times as popular as Jiwoong and Matthew and the newcomer Ricky and Gyuvin. As I mentioned previously, Gyuvin and Ricky now have about half the number of fanfictions as Haobin, but that's still a 1,500-ish fic difference. Matt Bin and Matt Woong are pretty much dead in the water. Polybears also showed how much of a member's popularity was tied to shipping by seeing how many of their appearances also had them in a pairing. Unsurprisingly, Junghao and Hanbin were at the top by an over 20-point difference, being on 81.89% and 84.17% respectively, with the next highest member being Jiwoong on 59.20%. That just makes me wonder, what are Haobin doing in fics that aren't Haobin? I would expect the number to be higher, honestly. And of course, Polybears included their whole spreadsheet, which I'd recommend you check out. Insane, and thanks so much to Polybears and other statistics lovers for their work. K-pop statistics are, in my opinion, the best kind of statistics. I would have loved to have reached out to Polybears about their work in this fanfiction field, but it seems like they haven't been active for a few months. The next post asks whether people actually think Haobin is real, and says that they think they have brilliant chemistry. Some funny comments under this post include this one which says that Haobin will become Karina 2.0 if either of them ever date a woman. To know about Karina, see my K-pop PR video. Other comments point out how they'd be surprised if a gay couple actually felt comfortable being this flirty in public, and other comments take more nuanced views, such as appreciating Haobin as a duo regardless. But of course, a lot of people are also convinced that Haobin are dating, giving various levels of evidence and often pointing to their past associations with queer culture. The next post is asking people who they think might actually be dating in K-pop, and someone posted the Haobin wedding photo card that sells for huge amounts of money. So yeah, I guess that was their answer. Another post points out how Haobin are still going strong despite the shenanigans of the rest of Zero Base 1's shipping landscape. And Gunnook finally found his place onto the list with the Gunnook Matthew ship. Ugh, no thanks. I don't like where this is going. Next, a post which mentions the wholly 3-hour Haobin movie, which, for the record, is a compilation of their interactions from the start of Boys Planet to Crush era, and which I'll link in the description. Next, a post from the start of the year which gives some statistics on the growth of K-pop ships on AO3 in 2024, and the overall popularity of ships. This is where we see that Taekook are still going strong with 4,600 new fanfictions in 2024 and 40,600 overall. This list is dominated by 3rd and early 4th gen groups, namely Stray Kids, NCT, BTS, ATEEZ, and 17. aespa are the only girl group to make the top 100, with the Winter Karina pairing being the 80th most popular ship overall and being the 21st fastest growing ship in 2024, with 1,000 new fanfictions and around 1,800 overall. With the prevalence of so many older boy groups, you'd expect slightly newer groups like TXT to be making their way to the top, right? Well, TXT's Yeonbin are 14th on the fastest growing list and 18th overall with 7,000 fanfictions, but not far behind are our heroes Haobin, being 12th on the fastest growing list with 1,800 fanfictions and 45th of all time with 3,400 at the end of the year. This is insane! Zero Base One were the only 5th gen group to make the top 50 fastest growing ships, with Boy Next Door at 54 and Rise just edging in at 97 and 100. Zero Base One are the only 5th gen group on the all-time list, and Haobin were almost alone. Ricky and Gyuvin only made it to 86th place. For Haobin and Zero Base One to have achieved these numbers in only a year and a half of debut seriously speaks to their popularity as a group and a ship, considering how they're going toe-to-toe with and even beating groups that are anywhere from 3 to 20 years older than them, and thus have had all that time to grow their fanfiction bases. I already mentioned this earlier, but the 2024 Zero Base One sub-census supported the popularity of Haobin, with Junghao being the most biased member at 30% and Hanbin being the top bias wrecker with 33.2%. If we take the common idea in K-pop that your bias is like you and your bias wrecker is your ideal type to be a fact, and consider, as I mentioned in my previous episode, that Junghao's personality is often changed to make him the reader imprint character, and, well, it's clear how many people imprinted on Junghao and started shipping him with their probable ideal type Hanbin. Hence the popularity of both members and of the pairing, which had already been nicely presented to fans as the two centres of the show. Fandom psychology! Haobin have become so well known and commonly discussed as a pair that some new fans and non-fans genuinely think they're the same person. Usually, a pair of members have an obviously not real chemistry name, like Lucky's or Meanie, or something more obvious like 98 Liners or something like that. But Haobin sounds like a real name, and apparently it is a real name in China, so the fact that Haobin are referred to as Haobin, not as their most common chemistry name centers or as Junghao and Hanbin, to such an extreme extent, explains just how and why it could be so easy to think they're the same person. I mean, I've been calling them Haobin more than I've said their individual names in these minisodes. So you can hopefully see by now the grip that Haobin have on the Zeros fandom and K-pop in general, and the insane power and influence they have in general. So keeping that in mind, let's talk about the implications of this ship on the future of produce, the industry, and Haobin themselves. Let's start small and go larger. What will happen to Haobin? Well, when Zero Base One doesn't exist anymore. Haobin are a money-making publicity machine. The only issue is they're tied almost more to each other now than they are as their own people, and you know, the Haobin money machine doesn't work if Haobin aren't together. Well, a lot of Haobinists point this out and say that they think this will be a reason Wakwon will try and keep the group together, or alternatively, if they can't, that Yuhua will buy Hanbin's contract so Haobin can continue to be together. But what if Yuhua doesn't? Well, although Hanbin and Junghao, as I previously mentioned, both have a long list of qualifications and will never be unsuccessful no matter what they do with their general careers and in K-pop specifically, I do think the separation of Haobin, whenever it happens, will largely impact them. They are still by far the most popular members of the group, but their popularity also comes largely from being combined. I can see a significant drop in Hanbin fans, especially coming after the breakup. Remember that Hanbin seems to have become the ideal type, while Junghao is the self-insert. Hence, fans are more closely bonded to Junghao and can continue to insert their own thoughts onto him regardless of whether he's in a pseudo-relationship with Hanbin or not. Hanbin? He is just Hanbin. Without Junghao, he may well become such a perfect, straight-laced person that he just ceases to be interesting, like Fuko on Island 2. To be fair, Junghao could well turn out this way too. He is also pretty perfect and straight-laced, and as the potential oldest member and leader of a new Yuhua group could even slot more into this personality. But I think Hanbin is in far greater danger of this. Make no mistake, they will both be perfectly fine after disbandment, pretty much no matter what happens. But I do think the separation will impact them in some way, and that it will affect Hanbin more, especially if he becomes a soloist and is alone in the world. Mind you, then some people might say he's saving himself for Junghao and latch onto him again, so I guess we can never fully know. Second, on to other trainees. Haobin have definitely had an impact on how fans see trainees on survival shows. They're always looking for the next Haobin or Haobin adjacent thing, or at the very least it's in the back of their minds. A prime example of this is this guy. This is JL, a Filipino trainee who participated in Universe League and made it into the final group. Is it AHOF or AHOF? Goodness knows how you say that. As rank 1. Now, I don't know a single thing about Universe League, as you might be able to tell, but I do know that when JL ranked first, a lot of Haobinists on Twitter were freaking out because apparently JL is one of them. The evidence for this is that he apparently reposted Haobin videos on TikTok, something I can't verify, but I can verify that at least a few people were encouraged to vote for him and thus would have contributed to him ranking first because of his Haobinist associations. Insane. We have trainees, and global trainees no less, winning survival shows now partially because of their Haobin lore. Do you realise how wacko this is? Next, produce. Boys Planet fans, as we saw in the previous segment, started speculating early on if Mnet would try to do something to replicate the Haobin storyline in the next seasons of Planet 999/Produce. Although they had always intended for Haobin to get into the group, I don't think that even Mnet were capable of predicting just how popular they would become, especially as a pair. So would Mnet try to recreate this organic growth artificially? Most people said yes, and they were right. Mnet announced the second season of Boys Planet would be, well, happening in July 2024, and announced the concept and name of the show Boys 2 Planet on November 22nd, 2024. There were two things that interested fans about this. First, that the second season of Boys Planet would happen before the second season of Girls Planet, something I discussed the potential reasons behind in my Kepler Renewed minisodes, and second, that the concept of the show was described as a twin project, with two groups, one from Korea and one from China. Hey, doesn't that sound familiar? Now, it turns out that this K group and C group thing isn't just a boys' planet but with only K and C group to replicate the Haobin storyline. Instead, it, funnily enough, is a copy of EXO's original concept, with a Korean group and a Chinese group that are kind of related and kind of not. This could also be compared to ENHYPEN and ANTEAM, which have the added detail of both being created through survival shows in different countries and different languages, which is what Mnet's doing. So yeah, this may not be a carbon copy of Haobin, but the marketing leans into the Haobin idea and the specific marketing of K and C as opposed to K and G, or two international shows in different languages, and this makes it clear that they're definitely trying to get all of the Haobin fans to watch these shows. Fans speculated about the reasons for this decision. For instance, a potential lack of Korean trainees auditioning for survival shows right now, and thus the need to appeal to a greater global trainee base. Another top comment points out how this could have been motivated by the fact that Junghao won Boys Planet. To Mnet, this signals that despite their best efforts and all of their rigory, they may not actually be able to prevent global trainees from making it into the final groups, ranking high, and even being the centre. And they don't want that, especially considering how hard they tried to push Hanbin to be first. At which point, it's entirely possible that some sleazy higher up at Mnet had the bright idea, Or hey, global trainees can't rank first if we only allow Koreans in. But then, of course, they also need to cater to global audiences, and it's rumoured that China will be removing their K-pop ban. Not to mention the popularity of Chinese survival shows in general, and the elephant in the room, Haobin. Hence, EXO Rip-Off Twin Project. This will no doubt try and recreate Haobin's storyline to some extent, or at least will evoke it. And honestly, they'll probably appear as MCs at some point. The fact that 1. Boys Planet 2 will happen before Girls Planet 2, and 2. that it's being marketed in this way is a testament not only to the popularity of Zero Base One and boy groups over Kepler, but also to the popularity and virality of Haobin. And not many people can say they've changed the direction of the entire produce franchise. Finally, onto the whole industry. This one is a bit more wishy-washy. I mean, there have been tons of super popular idol ships, and I don't think any of them have really single-handedly changed the industry. But Haobin will have a lasting impact on how people see both Junghao and Hanbin, Zero Base One, produce, and potentially even male idol shipping in general. Haobin will always be part of the shipping vocab and will always be a comparison people make. And that's a pretty insane legacy for two people to have. So with that said, we're finally at the end of what I wanted to say about Haobin. For now. More rabbit holes may well show up in the future. Let's wrap up this double minisode. It's kind of hard to think of Haobin as anything other than a phenomenon. Literally, they aren't really people anymore. They're caricatures of themselves and have merged into a single entity. In the first part of this minisode, I gave some corrections and updates on my original Zero Base One episode, then discussed the history of Haobin and what each member brings to the table from a fan point of view. In this part of the minisode, I discussed the power and reach of Haobin, which demonstrates how and why they have become this single entity, and the impact it has had on several measures of popularity, but most notably fanfiction. I also talked about some more negative aspects of this popularity and their fandom, including the fetishization and dehumanization of idols, and how their personalities are molded to the whims of the fans. I also discussed some arguably more light-hearted rabid fan activities, such as complaining about Junghao's lines even though he literally gets the most lines. But these kinds of things are common in K-pop, especially for survival show groups. After that, I discussed the implications of Haobin. For instance, these two have become merged, right? So what happens when they have to separate and the illusion is broken? I then discussed the implications of this ship on other trainees, produce as a whole, and the K-pop industry in general. At the end of all of this, let's just say Haobin are a very interesting ship, and Haobinists are a very interesting fandom. Also, as you would tell from my Zero Base One video, I think that Zero Base One are an interesting group in general. And that's finally all I wanted to discuss for now. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next minisode.